The Art of Flow.
Welcome to The Art of Flow, a podcast that explores connecting with your body, mind, and soul via movement arts and creative exploration. Through conversations with movement artists, circus performers, flow artists, and fire dancers. My name is Morgan Dalgano, and I'm the creator and host of the podcast, a flow arts enthusiast and a life coach. Today we'll be talking with Bunny Holmes about the creation of the Vespertine Circus and their currently running show, the Rocky Horror Circus Show. Bunny Holmes has been casting and putting on shows since preschool. First place for the neighbors, then DIY dance recitals for friends from school. And by fourth grade, she was enrolled in before school choir, after school drama classes, and briefly missed school outright because she was touring as a toy soldier in a youth ensemble, Nutcracker Ballet. In high school, she started street performing around tourist attractions in San Francisco as a living statue. Alongside circus and performing arts, Bunny studied music history, humanistic psychology, and religious studies at UCSC. There, she gained a reputation for coordinating large, all-ages events, both on and off campus, often designed with an absurd, whimsical, or humorous concept. Needless to say, her love of the stage has never diminished, and when she told her friends she was going to start a circus, they believed her, and some joined the cause. If you too want to see the Rocky Horror Circus Show, there are still some tickets available, and upcoming performances include Saturday, March 12th, Thursday, March 18th, Friday, March 19th, and Saturday, March 20th. So take a look at the show notes below to get a link to the website for the Vespertine Circus and tickets. So Bunny, what was the inspiration to do a circus show inspired by Rocky Horror?
So this was one of those kind of aha moments. A little bit of backstory is that in 2005, I was on a Rocky Horror shadow cast at my college. It was the first theatrical thing that I did after moving out of my parents' house, and it was a lot of fun. So I did kind of grow up with Rocky Horror as a tradition and hadn't thought much about it for some time. And then I was training tight wire with my wire walking partner, and we just had music on shuffle on, and the time warp came on. And I had this, oh, I can do this up here, I bet. Like, I think I could probably do the time warp on the tight wire. And having established, like, yeah, I think that is an achievable sequence of movements, we were like, I think we have to do this show. It was just a really sticky idea. So it was something that I kind of stumbled upon. And then it was this neat retrospective, because the first year that we did Rocky Horror Circus Show was in 2016, which was like 10 and a half years since I had performed on a shadow cast. So this was a good number of years into having founded Vespertine Circus and done circus tours and lots of performances with Vespertine, and kind of a calling back to roots and going, how has it grown up? How far have I come since 2005 when I was performing Rocky Horror?
That's so fascinating that the inspiration came to you both from your previous performance history and also while you were simultaneously practicing with a partner this new skill set or this emerging skill set that you were honing in on, and the realization that you could integrate your previous knowledge into it.
It was a really fun challenge. I was like, oh, I haven't really thought too much about performing Rocky Horror in 10 years. What would happen if we blended the circus arts that I've been working on ever since then with that tradition? So Rocky Horror Circus Show kind of came out of that pretty organically. And like I said, it was a sticky idea. So, once it was in my head, I was like, all right, I guess this has to happen. And more ideas kept coming out of that kind of conversation. Once it started, everyone who was familiar with Rocky Horror on the cast was really excited to pay homage in different ways.
And what's your favorite part of performing the show?
I love when we get to do Rocky Horror. This is our third run of performing Rocky Horror Circus Show. And Vespertine Circus, if we have one thing that kind of holds the most true across our shows, it's that they're comedies. Even when they're dealing with dark or heavy subject matter, they're fundamentally comedy shows, and Rocky Horror is no different, but it is also kind of everybody's chance to unabashedly ham it up and be as sexy and ridiculous and over the top as possible. Like, this might be our silliest show, and it is definitely our most self-indulgent feeling show. So there are so many costumes and so many chances for people to just kind of revel in themselves and bring their really sexy energy forward and walk that line between um, doing something that's like very attractive and very impressive and very provocative, and also having a sense of humor throughout the whole thing, being very tongue-in-cheek, being very silly. And I love this show in how many opportunities it grants people to revel in those two very joyful aspects of themselves.
I saw the show recently this past weekend, and that was definitely one of the things that stood out to me, how silly it was at the same time as sexy, and it blends the two together in a really magical way. So in this version of Rocky Horror, it's pretty unique and uses different music. Is there a story behind that?
There is. So the first time we were going to do the show, we were going to do it more shadowcast style, and we were going to work with the music from the film, and even played with ideas of doing it in front of a projection of the film. And I was looking into getting the rights to do that and found on a number of fronts that it was prohibitive. In fact, it wasn't just cost prohibitive, but for shadowcasts, there's a limited number of people per city that can perform it. Because they don't want to create too much competition between casts. So as you might imagine, San Francisco has been at capacity for Rocky Horror troops legally performing in front of the film, and has a really long waiting list if you want to perform Rocky Horror in front of the movie. And we were already booked in San Francisco. So we had kind of plan A and plan B and plan C for how to pay for and secure music rights, and whether or not we were going to do it in front of a video. And we talked about doing it in front of part of a video, and then that turned out to be more expensive than screening the whole film, because they really don't want it taken out of context, and they were all priced as though they were going to be used by advertisers or like much larger organizations, and we're tiny. We don't have any corporate sponsorship. And so because there was like plan A and plan B and plan C to work with the original film material, none of those worked, but they didn't work last minute. Like, we had been rehearsing the show for months to the music from the movie. This is 2016. And I had a panic moment where I was like, all right, well, I've just been talking to people at Fox, and I've been talking to, all of the sort of film representatives for this, and can't see a way to make it happen. And also, we opened in like 2 days. What do I do? Because we were so confident that like one of the ways was going to work, and there were so many Rocky productions around that were like, well, clearly this is accessible, because we weren't aware that there were kind of capacity quotas, a lot of other red tape about it that we just didn't expect to run into. And all of my shows come from sound. I'm like, music is sort of the wellspring of creativity for me. I'll be listening to music, and that's when my imagination gets rolling, and that's usually the first thing that happens on any show. And so I'm like, all right, audio design puzzle. And in a very, very frantic, like 90 minutes, it was under 2 hours, I went and I found alternate songs. And I thought, they've rehearsed these acts, so it has to be about the same tempo, about the same length. It should be in a similar style. It should have plot appropriate lyrical content. I only want to use songs if I think every song I'm using is objectively better than the one in the movie, which is not like a super high bar. Rocky Horror is beloved. It's not beloved because it has phenomenal music. It's beloved for a lot of other reasons. But I went and I did this sort of adrenaline fueled crossword puzzle to find an alternate soundtrack and put it together. And then I approached the cast and I was like, if all of you are on board to rework your act to new music at like 2 days notice, then we'll go forward and we'll open with this score. If anyone's not up for the challenge, we can pull the show and we can refund people, and I will find a way to pay people. We're ticket funded, so it's kind of scary if it's like, oh, show's canceled. because we don't have corporate sponsorship, we don't have grant funding, we don't have government support. And so, I put something together, and then I did this trust fall, and I was like, hi, I know you've been rehearsing for a couple of months to other music, but how do you feel about just changing it at the last minute? And every person on the cast enthusiastically was like, all right, this is what we're doing, and signed on and came together and changed their blocking and moved stuff around. And we all liked it so much better than the original that the thought to go back or to try and find another way to do it with the original music never crossed our minds. We were like, oh, this was it. This was the magic ingredient that was missing. Because it makes the show fresh for people who've seen Rocky a lot, and it's really accessible, and it makes it ours, and it lets us update things that we feel need updating, and I'm so glad that it ended up happening exactly the way that it did. But yeah, it was kind of a surprise for us the first time.
What an amazing cast to roll with those changes in such a short period of time and be willing to rise to that challenge. And also for you to, like, in this very short amount of time, do a massive music scavenger hunt. That sounds like a very difficult task.
It it was crazy. It was, and in live theater, there's always like something will go catastrophically wrong, and you will just scramble and fix it in the nick of time. Um, I mean, you don't hope for that, and it doesn't always happen that way, but like it's live theater, and there's so many interdependent parts. And so, everyone in the cast has been a performing arts professional for a long time, and they all have really good rapport working with one another and a lot of trust. And so they're very, very good at rolling with punches, which makes it a joy to create with them, because it also opens up our creative possibilities a lot when people are always reaching for like new and inventive ways to do things.
You mentioned that by changing the music, you also had the flexibility to then change it even further in the future and add new music and add different acts. How has the show changed since when you first performed it in 2016?
So in 2016, we had some slightly different casting. We do have the same cast that we had in 2017. So we are now a consistent set, which is great. And it's been a lot of time since 2017. So the bones of the show are the same, the music, a lot of the audio, but we have added scenes, and the scenes themselves have become a lot more dynamic. In the years since the last time we performed Rocky Horror, we've done 2 other original shows, and we like to add more and more ensemble work as people get closer with one another. And it's hard, but it's really satisfying work when you're creating something with other people. So the earliest version of it was much more strictly solo pieces. And now everybody's on stage just so much and in each other's scenes and creating these character relationships and dynamics. And Marry Me used to be a solo scene. The Who Will Stop the Rain When They Get Lost in the Storm used to be a solo scene. Those are both duets now with Brad and Janet. We added Columbia to the Time Warp. We keep adding more character appearances. And so the thing feels like a more cohesive ensemble now. In addition to that, everybody's skills keep leveling up. Everybody's stage presence keeps improving. People are moving through their careers and getting more and more, able to like carry just incredibly dynamic energy on stage. And so it does feel like the cast themselves are growing up a lot in really wonderful ways. And we're upgrading things like costumes and props and equipment. Eddie's routine in the last version was aerial straps. Now it's aerial chains. We've got, just like more group numbers, better skills, better costumes. Everybody's much closer with each other. The last time that we did the show, people knew each other, but not super well. And now we're all like best friends and in each other's business all the time. And so that closeness and intimacy that we have off stage, I think plays out on stage really nicely. So the chemistry is better. The whole thing's just a better oiled machine.
I noticed that there are some numbers from Rocky Horror Picture Show from, when it came out in 1975 that are, they're not really in the show. Maybe they didn't age that well. What did you take out, and was there thinking behind that?
Yeah, definitely. What we're trying to do with this show is make sure that we're keeping the heart and the queer history and the tradition of Rocky Horror in its truest spirit alive, but we're also updating it a little bit for modern sensibilities. And so, one of the things that we were freed up to do with changing out the music is we took out Sweet Transvestite. That song is not in it. And so, we're not using dated language to describe people who are presenting in sort of gender spectrum, gender fuckery ways. We're able to sidestep that entirely. There is a scene in the film where Frank seduces Brad and Janet, and they're very reluctant because they're very like pearl clutchy and puritanistic. And if you go back and you look at it, I think they were aiming for they're reluctant, but they come around. But dialogue wise, it comes off as really rapey now. It feels quite coercive. And I don't think that was the angle then, but like our sensibilities have shifted, our use of language has shifted, and we're a lot more aware that like being pushy at people who are showing reluctance sexually is not okay and is in fact coercive. And so we recorded new audio content to have basically that scene where Frank seduces Brad and Janet without any of the coercive elements. So we got to completely rework that. We have a couple of voice actors involved with the troupe, one of whom is actually on the stage cast, and they have a recording studio in their home. So we went and redrafted and made this whole clowning scene that fills that plot hole, but doesn't do it the way that the movie did, that is currently a little uncomfortable to watch. We've also, we've got a mind to which call lines our cast members engage with. We have Transylvanians on the cast who like help warm up the audience and do call lines, and we skip the stuff that feels offensive and go with the stuff that just feels vulgar or silly. Absurdist stuff we keep, offensive stuff we get rid of. And the beginning of the show, we have a pre-show game, like audience interaction as part of our crowd warm-up, which is something that shadowcasts do. And there's a shadowcast tradition that's like the sacrificing of virgins, and virginity is weird. So just acknowledge that. Talk about how we're going to actually do away with the whole talking about virginity thing, because what the fuck is that, if you'll pardon my language. And instead move into like, actually anyone who wants to play with us can play, and we're not here to haze newbies. And so in a lot of cases, it's we acknowledge what this was, we're going to keep the parts of it that are fun, and we're going to leave the rest behind, and we can talk about that, or we can just skip over it and not talk about it. But trying to like walk that line between being very true to the original spirit and also moving forward tastefully and catering to who we are and our audience, is a lot of thought. It's a lot of balancing, but it's been very fun to pave that.
So it sounds like what it has in common with those, the shadow cast is a lot of audience engagement and a lot of playfulness and spirit. And by making these modifications, you've been able to update it for the age that we live in and for the values that you and the Vespertine Circus hold as a collective and that you're putting out into the world. Kudos. That's awesome. Do you need to be familiar with Rocky Horror to enjoy the show?
So I have two like target audience members that I see, like type of person, that I see as the litmus test for success of this show. And one is someone who loves Rocky Horror and is attached to the traditions and maybe was on a shadow cast themselves, or who's been 50 times, been 100 times, grew up with it. And for their approval, it's very important to me that they feel like we've done a good job of bringing out the things that are beloved about it, even making as many modifications as we have. And the other audience member that I'm always thinking of is someone who's never been to Rocky Horror before and is kind of along for the ride or doesn't know what to expect. And does it feel like a fun introduction for them? Does it give them a flavor of it? Is it confusing? Is it welcoming? I've gotten a lot of feedback from people in both categories that say that it's an excellent show, which is great. Like, it's the best thing for me to hear, because I want to make sure that I'm meeting both of those marks when I'm doing something like Rocky Horror. Does the plot make sense? Our version makes at least as much sense as the film. Narratively, it's kind of a similar level of what? But we do try to carry the plot through. And then even without following the story or the characters, which we do try to make a lot of space for, The circus spectacle itself kind of transcends language barriers and the understanding of narrative all on its own, which is one of the things I love the most about circus, is it can be very cross-cultural and international because it's very visual language.
I'm wondering what it's like as a producer of the show. What's your role as a producer, and how much control do the artists have over the choreographies that they create?
My role as a producer is, there's like an image, it's a popular gif of Kermit the Frog in front of a red curtain flailing. That's me. I'm the one hitting the panic button. The fact of the matter is we're a really small company. You can see everybody there who's a part of this thing. And so my role is many. My role is many roles. If you message us about ticketing or accessible seating or age appropriateness of the show or any of that, I'm the person that you're going to get answering. If you look at our marketing materials, our Instagram, our TikTok videos, I'm the one editing and posting those and writing all of the copy. If there are scheduling questions, if there's coordinating group rehearsals, if there's booking the theater, if there's any of that, my role as a producer is currently that I step into any role that needs doing. And the cast is tremendously supportive and helps a lot with behind the scenes stuff as well. So I do feel like very held in that, and like I can ask for help with things, which is great. In terms of the acts themselves, they're really driven by the artists. I love getting to direct these people because they can do so much and they're such a joy to work with. People come to this show with their costumes and their creativity and their choreography, and I'm just sort of creating an outline for them to build in, which doesn't mean that there isn't ever a feedbacking process. Sometimes, we'll workshop things or we'll talk about an act, or, hey, does this shape look good here? Does this feel right here? So I have, in the past, over the course of Vespertine, taken on various roles in helping with choreography, things like that. But what you're seeing up there really is created by the performers. They have a lot of creative freedom. They're basically given a song and a premise, and I trust them to do wonderful things with it. So the most creative input I have over the acts is hiring them. It's being like, I love what you make. You're very good at it. You very clearly work really hard at it. You're very clearly doing really, really clever things. I would love it if you were interested in this role and this part. Here's a song. What do you want to make? Which is great. Like, I have a ton of trust artistically with everybody in the company.
It sounds like as producer, you interweave the different components together. You guide the artistic concept by sort of giving the keywords, the key concepts to give everyone that central inspiration that ties things together. And you are the juggler of many hats that you are wearing at different times.
It's involved, but it's really satisfying and rewarding work.
And what's it like backstage?
Amazing. Now, the thing about Backstage at this show is that this is in many ways our most complicated, most ambitious show we've done yet. It's hard to compare them to one another, but this one has so many moving parts that everybody is on from start to finish. So it's a 90-minute show and nobody has breaks backstage. They are either warming up for their act, on stage in an act, changing costumes backstage, or acting as a stagehand and moving props and rigging around from start to finish. Everyone in the cast is a stagehand. Everyone in the cast is in multiple costumes. Shawn Michaels in 4 costumes. I'm in multiple wigs. I spent an entire song bobby pinning my second wig onto my head so that it won't fly off. And so all of the setting changes, and they're like, okay, who can do this rigging change? Who can move this object? Who can move the cube or the pole or this piece of equipment or strike the wire rig, is just who isn't on stage right now? Okay, you're going to be doing this then. And so it is this really, really wonderful, fast-paced work environment where there really aren't any slow moments at all. Like, we're helping each other get dressed, and move all of the things. Lyra, who plays Trixie and Eddie in the show, is a rigger herself and does pulling lines at one point, like belays another performer from the ceiling. So we have a lines person, but we also have Lyra doing lines and stagehand and playing two characters and voice acting for Janet. Yeah, just it's very nonstop. Like you blink and then the show has passed because time moves so quickly back there because there aren't any slow moments. You're just moving continuously.
Wow. Like the story itself, like the show itself, it sounds like Backstage is just a whirlwind of different activity and a lot of variety.
Yeah, there aren't any slow moments.
You mentioned that in comparison to the other shows the Vespertine Circus has created, because the Vespertine Circus has been around for like 12 years now, that this one is probably the most complex. How else does it compare to the previous shows you guys have produced?
It's interesting because it's very hard for me to choose a favorite, right? They're all my children. There are things that will be my favorite aspect of one show to the next. Hinge was the most complicated build, for sure. High Tide had, up until this point, the most ensemble work, and I think it might still have slightly more group scenes than this one because it had singing, where everyone in the cast came out and did musical performances. And so it had kind of a little bit more of a musical theater vibe, and that one had projection for the set because we were working at Z Space and they have this wonderful rear projection setup, so that one is very visually spectacular. No Graves, No Masters is probably the one I'm proudest of from a writing perspective, concept perspective. Hard to sell because people don't know what to expect. No Graves, No Masters was a zombie comedy that had sort of a tonal, it got compared to Book of Mormon a lot. It was a Black comedy and it was an allegory for climate change denialism. So it was also our most political show. But people are like, zombie circus, why would I? And it's like, no, it's not actually that scary. It's funny. come see, I promise. It's weird, but and then this show is the one where I think we get to be the most self-indulgent and sort of revel in the joy of being on stage the most, and has the most costumes for sure, and is definitely a contender for the most ensemble work. One of the biggest differences between Rocky Horror and High Tide is High Tide was an all ages show. No Graves, No Masters was like PG-13. Like there are some things that could have been spooky to a little kid, but was otherwise all ages appropriate. And this one is definitely an 18 and over show because we're just, like I said, reveling in our sexiness and shouting profanities and doing a lot of the things that are very traditional to Rocky Horror. And so that's one of the main ways that it's different.
Shifting focus a little, we've been talking a lot about this current production, Rocky Horror Circus Show, which, by the way, you can still get tickets. So look at the show notes below for dates. And if you're in the San Francisco or Bay Area, go ahead and click on those links and get your tickets today because you do not want to miss out. Setting this current production aside, though, I want to ask you a couple of more personal questions as Bunny, as the producer of Vespertine Circus. What are your personal considerations of inclusion within the scope of the circus you created and within this particular production?
So inclusion and diversity are really, really important. And that's the case working in entertainment because we're dealing with issues of representation and trying to get diverse bodies on stage, and also just sort of running any group. But I think going into a conversation talking about diversity and inclusion, I want to preface with saying that like I'm not a qualified teacher of those things. I am somebody stumbling through, trying to do my best, running a very small company with it. And this feels like an apt time because, and COVID does this too, there are a lot of social issues and now more recently public health issues and political issues that people are looking to entertainers to solve. And they feel like in the most significant sense, these are institutional problems, and we should be looking to politicians and to our educational system and to systemic inequality when it comes to income and resources and access to education in particular, that are the real, I don't want to say are the real problems, but are the bigger problems that like a clown can't solve. a casting director can't solve. So the things that I can do and the things that I try to do is I try to be diversity minded when I'm casting. I don't have a specific or narrow vision of the types of people that I bring into the cast, whether that is age or body type or race or gender or sexuality. I try to create a work environment that is receptive to feedback. I want to listen to the people who are working with me and hear their notes so that I'm filling in blind spots that I inevitably have, that I inevitably have as a white person, that I inevitably have just because I'm limited to my own personal experience, and do whatever I can to create space and safety for the needs that the individuals that I'm working with and hosting as an audience and as guests may have. So I love working in spaces that have gender neutral restrooms. Things like that make me very happy. When we were on tour some years ago, we had a cast member who's now a rabbi, and we made space to do Shabbat on Fridays, and like asking people about what their needs are, being really receptive to feedback, being mindful of trying to create diversity when casting, and also not in a way that tokenizes anybody, and being comfortable sitting down and having conversations with people about what their needs are and their visions are, and knowing that like they're going to have ideas about things that wouldn't have occurred to me because of the limitations of my perspective. So, we're a really queer troupe. We've got a variety of gender representation. Our Frankenfurter is played by a non-binary person. They're lovely. I think a lot of it is like have an attitude toward wanting to make the space safe for a lot of different people, and then listen to those people when they ask for things and when they tell you what that means to them, rather than assuming that you know what safe means and I'll just make that container and then leave it like that. It has to be an ongoing dialogue, to step back to the conversation about kind of systemic inequality. The arts are a really challenging way to make a living, and performing arts and circus arts especially is sort of like asking for economic instability in your career path. And so it's very, very hard because the people who can pursue that and can pursue that for a long time tend to be people who have generational wealth that they can rely on if something goes sideways, and who have access to equipment that's very expensive and extra insurance or physical health care, like body work that can be very expensive. There are just a lot of really high barriers for entry. And that's really difficult. And that's really difficult because when you're a casting director, the pool of qualified professionals that you have to cast from is impacted by those systemic issues. And you can be proactive, and there are lots of really, really wonderful people who've overcome, incredible odds to participate and have flourishing careers in the arts. But I care a lot about making sure that we have better access to safe rigging and circus equipment and schools. And I would love to see an accredited circus school in the United States, especially one with a good scholarship program. We don't currently have one. A lot of countries do, the United States doesn't. It would be really, really wonderful to see politicians push harder on social services and education and addressing income inequality. And a lot of that starts with voting rights and protecting them really proactively and trying to undo gerrymandering so that people can actually represent their own interests. And then enough of a push on education that the average person who might go and vote has a better sense of what those interests are. So these are like bigger issues. And, outside of my circus family and my lovely audience and the things that we can do at home, these are also things that impact the way that I vote and the way that I'm involved in more local politics, and where to donate. Because if you care about diversity in circus, then you have to care about income inequality, and you have to care about the access to education, and you have to care about all of these things that are obstacles that really, really limit the scope of who can put themselves in enough of a vulnerable position to pursue performing arts.
Thank you so much for delving into a really complete picture of your personal perspectives around this. I think it's really important to mention it, particularly because the show you're creating, Rocky Horror Circus Show, is based on Rocky Horror, which is such a cult classic when it comes to some different gender representation and sexual representation in the world. And so I was really curious to hear some of your personal ideas on the subject.
It is a sticky subject, right? And I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to stumble with it. I think the important thing, if you are trying to do right in your work environment, is to just be receptive to other people's perspectives and try to incorporate feedback with grace and flexibility and move forward. Yeah, we're an entertainment company. We're trying to make you laugh, but I hope to have really good internal values and policies that people can feel when they come to the audience, and to try and make as many people feel welcome and safe and able to have a good time is very important to me.
What interests you about the circus arts and performing world?
So people have been asking me how I got started doing circus or why the circus since I started doing it, and I have never come up with a clever answer or really understood how to describe the like long form answer. So I'm like, oh no, this question I should know by now. Um, I started performing as a living statue in high school. I was deeply fascinated by sideshow history. My screen name a bunch of places is actually the name of a type of conjoined twin. It is the type most likely to survive while still joined through adulthood. Um, I was fascinated by vaudeville and by circus and by sideshow and by there being a place for otherness where it could be celebrated, and street performing was great. That was probably my start. I did dance and theater and singing since I was a little kid. My father is an artist. I grew up in kind of a creative household, so it was nurtured early on, and I used to put on shows like in preschool for the neighbors. I would cast my family in parts, and then we would put on little ridiculous preschooler performances of sort of reduxes of Disney movies, and that's fine. It was very silly, but yeah, I did living statue in high school, and I learned to juggle then from a boy that I was involved with, and then at college, I started doing the fire dancing thing. I started taking aerial fabrics lessons and getting more serious about that and taking clowning courses. I moved from that to working as a children's entertainer. And I founded Vespertine Circus when I was 21, um, which I don't have a good way to explain that. That was just, I wanted to do the thing. And so I was working on starting up the circus and working part-time as a children's entertainer and doing magic and balloon twisting and face painting for kids. And so I kind of just jumped right off the deep end into the like freelance entertainment circuit, and have pretty exclusively only worked in the entertainment industry ever since.
Wow. It sounds like it's been a long-standing passion of yours to perform since you were really young, and that your interests have just evolved and changed, and you've just acquired more and more and more. And it's not just even the particular arts such as tightrope walking or fire dancing for you, but generally even circus history draws you in.
Yeah, a lot of people in the circus world arrived there because they were movement artists first, which makes sense because it's, I mean, if you're working as a circus acrobat, you're a professional athlete. And so the people who tend to find their way to that are most often people who come from a background in athletics. They will arrive at it through sports and through dance, through gymnastics in particular. And you see that a lot. And I did get serious about dance and movement and circus arts later, but my love for it came from a love of circus history and circus iconography and the like lineage of it and the philosophy of clowning and all of these things. So I there's like different types of people in the circus world, you know, and circus like super fans very rarely become performers. right? But I was like, no, I was just a circus nerd, and got asked, well, if you love it, why don't you do it? And I was like, because I can't, I'm clumsy. I'm not a, I'm not an athlete. I draw pictures. I write poetry. I don't move my body. That looks really hard. And it was really hard. I'm not a kinesthetic learner. I'm like the last person to get choreography. I grew up thinking that I really didn't like sports. I was like a drama kid, but I didn't fall in love with moving until Circus. And it was really a lot of work, but I love the spirit of it. And I love that it's something that just exists to make people happy. And I find it euphoric, and I find it very challenging and very rewarding.
And is that the impact you want to have on the world, to use circus to make people happy? Or is there another impact that you want to have with the art that you create?
Is that too cheesy an answer? I don't know.
No.
There's a lot of things I want to do with my life. And there's a lot of different types of art that I create. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, like I could go on about it a lot, but the short version is, yeah, I would like to make people happy. Senseless beauty, right? Just make things that are sort of a triumph of human capability, and that make people laugh and make people forget their troubles for a while, and maybe get inspired to like get moving or try things that they didn't think that they could do before. And there's something nostalgic too about circus, right? It's kind of old fashioned in a lot of ways, and no matter how much we update it. And I think there's something that I cherish about keeping some of those traditions alive.
And we're approaching the end of our time together. Is there anything else you want to share with listeners?
Come to the show. It's really fun. I didn't know. It's you can do these things. If I was talking to anybody listening to this and they felt so inspired, as someone that was not an athlete and was not a mover and did not come from a circus family and did not graduate from a circus college, I've been working for a circus for 12 years. You can do it too. You can learn these skills. You can create things and watch them grow and go out into the world. And it's a wonderful feeling, and it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of hours, and it's worth doing, and it's worth pursuing. So I guess just to the people who are on the fence or are intimidated or don't know where to start, reach out. There are circus organizations and resources and wonderful educational resources that can put you on the path to doing that thing if you, like me, are looking at it fondly but feeling not equipped for the challenge. You can totally do that thing. And circus is a huge world. So people who are in it, who are lifers, will move through many roles in circus. There'll be acrobats, and there'll be clowns, and there'll be MCs, and then there'll be theater technicians or riggers, or it takes a whole village. And so, keep an open mind and put yourself out there, but don't be scared to try.
Thank you so much, Bunny. It's been lovely having you on the show. And for listeners, see you next time. The Art of Flow is a free public resource for creators, teachers, and supporters of the arts who are interested in flow arts and fire dancing. It is available for mainstream distribution on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, and at theartofflowpodcast.com. If you believe in a show that provides inspiration for artists and conversations on the creative process, please support the podcast on Patreon to keep it going. As a supporter, you can earn early access full-length interviews, submit questions for interviewees, be mentioned in an episode, and get a behind-the-scenes look at how the podcast is made. That's The Art of Flow if you're searching for it online. You can also follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook to receive shorter clips of episodes, updates, and notifications when new episodes are released.